So right now, DeAndre Hopkins and Dalvin Cook are two of the most notable available free agents in the NFL. In the past few weeks, there's been debate as to where these guys are going to land, what team they're going to end up. Hopkins met with the Titans and Patriots last week. Dalvin Cook has yet to meet with any specific teams. There's been no one to report that as of yet. But he did share last week, Dalvin Cook, that there were some teams that reached out to him. But yesterday, Dalvin Cook was on Adam Schefter of ESPN. Cook was on his podcast and had this to say about the idea of Hopkins and Cook ending up on the same roster. He said this, Dalvin Cook, "If we end up on the same roster, that would be something epic for the NFL. I know his mindset, and I done play against D-Hop a numerous amount of times. When I been with D-Hop, we done chill together. We done been around each other, and it's like I kind of see the person that he is like. He wants to win, and that's what my mind at too." My opinion on this is the odds of Dalvin Cook and DeAndre Hopkins somehow landing on the same team are slim to none. I'd say they're pretty much non-existent, just because if you're an NFL team and you're looking to sign Hopkins and Cook, you have to be able to have enough cap space on your team to fit a contract for Dalvin Cook and a contract for DeAndre Hopkins. And I would assume Dalvin Cook wants to make somewhere around $10 or so million a year. He was let go by the Vikings a few weeks back because his cap hit for the team was around $14 million. And I think that they realize and recognize that right now in the NFL, paying aging running backs who are getting up in their late 20s, $14 or so million for a season is just not the best move I think the best allocation of your resources. And so instead they went with Alexander Mattison, who they're paying like $3 or so million a year. So Cook, I think, will probably want to make at least $10 million a year. Hopkins, I would assume, would likely want to make around what Odell got, which is about 1 year, $18 million, $15 million guaranteed. I've seen people mention that maybe Hopkins would go for $8 to $10 million. But I still think he's a top 10 receiver in the NFL, and I don't think that he would, go for $8 to $10 million unless he's willing to take a pay cut. So if you're that team who wanted to add both those guys, who some teams clearly would probably like to have both those guys on the roster, but to have to pay Dalvin Cook around $10 or so million, Hopkins maybe $15 million, that's a huge chunk of change, and so I think the odds of that actually happening are very low. But if I personally were a GM of a team these days, I just think when you look at running backs and their value, I just think we've seen them dip down over the years just because teams recognize that you can find a somewhat serviceable back for pretty cheap. And I think that when you look at receivers, you just need receivers who can get open, who can create separation. When it comes to running backs, all you really need is an offensive line that opens up holes. And so I would say it's better to invest in your offensive line than it is to invest in your running back. And so instead of spending $10 or so million on a running back, I would much prefer to put that on the offensive line or potentially sign a top tier receiver and go with a much cheaper running back, because we see it all the time. Late round running backs, undrafted running backs who come into a situation where there's a pretty solid offensive line and then all of a sudden are able to produce at a very, very high level. And I think that's the issue with the running back market right now. It's tough for running backs because they're clearly valued way less than they used to be. And guys like Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs have had a hard time getting a long-term extension that they like. And, they still have a few weeks until they have to decide whether they sign their franchise tag or not. And so running backs are just in the situation where they're recognizing that they're not valued as they once were. And I think that it's just the market showing where teams see value, and it's not really in running backs anymore. There are clearly teams that still value running backs, like the Lions, who use a 12th overall pick on Jahmyr Gibbs. But I'd say as time has gone by, the past few seasons, even decade, teams wanting to invest a lot of money, especially in aging running backs. Running backs in their late 20s is not very as prevalent as it used to be. And so the odds of Cook and Hopkins, even though it sounds exciting, if you're a team and you got both of those guys, it would be exciting just because they're two very talented players. Even though they are a little bit older than they used to be, there's no doubt they're talented. But to spend that much money on both players would not be the best idea. If I had to pick one player, I'd go with Hopkins. I still think that a receiver is more important than a running back, and so with Hopkins, being 31 years old now, I still think he has a little bit left in the tank. We saw it last year in his short time in with the Cardinals after missing 6 games from his PED suspension. He can still put up solid numbers. And so we'll see where these guys end up. I doubt it's on the same team, but I just wanted to share that information from this morning. And if you guys want to stay up to date with all NFL news, I have a newsletter where I break down every single morning, every news story, keep you up to date. It's at sidelinescoop.com. So that's linked down below. Also, you can just type in sidelinescoop.com in your browser, and you can sign up for my NFL newsletter and get up to date news every single morning in your inbox, every weekday morning. But that's all I have for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.